do you love about Washington and Lee and Lexington, this community?
Number one, the students that we attract to campus are super smart, super energized. They're interested in the subject. If I make politics boring, I should find another line of work. So they're a fun group to teach. I don't like to lecture. I start class with a question, and they expect that. And if they don't have an answer, I call on a student and I say, turn to page 16. I have them read a paragraph, and then I ask my question again. So I try to turn my class into a conversation. And because it's politics, I think I'm actually trying, at least I'm hoping I'm emulating what it is we need to do as engaged citizens, which is to have conversations about challenging, divisive subjects, but in a way that we can do so in a civil way, a candid way, and I hope a productive way. So I'm hoping that what we do in the classroom, they do in their dorm rooms, at the cafe, in town, etc. So the fact that they like that, I teach this way. I'm at a university that has the luxury of having very small class sizes, and so we can have that kind of conversation.
And speaking of that, tell me about your recent work that you published.
My book is called Lincoln and the American Founding. It's published through Southern Illinois University Press. They have a series called the Concise Lincoln Library. And what they wanted is scholars on Lincoln to talk about a very focused issue. And in my case, I look at what I believe is the greatest influence on Abraham Lincoln, which was the American founding. Washington, the Declaration of Independence, and even things like the constitutional compromises over slavery. How did the founders address that great contradiction to self-government? Lincoln learned from that and tried to keep our country on that track. He thought we were going off those rails and thought the founders did this right. He didn't consider them hypocrites. He thought they were prudent in what they were trying to do. Slavery was here, it pre-existed the formation of self-government. They couldn't get rid of it right away, but they thought they were setting up structures that could get rid of it over time. And of course, tragically, the only way we could get rid of it was during a war. So my book, only 125 pages between the boards. I'm hoping that it's written in a way that's jargon-free. If you have an interest in Lincoln, the Civil War, and the American founding, I think my book is a very good primer for that subject.
And you're an expert in this and in the history in this, and how crucial is that history and understanding it and all aspects of it to where we are today, especially in the climate that we're in and the discussions that we're having right now?
I think what history does is it enables us to step out, at least intellectually. In our minds, we can step back a second and think more clearly about the things that we're enmeshed in right now. And we discover that, maybe this isn't the first time this country has been really polarized. Maybe this isn't the first time it looks like we can't talk to our neighbors without getting into a fist fight. Presumably, our history teaches us that sticking to ballots rather than bullets is the preferred way, the standard operating procedure for a free people, and that there are certain, not only ways of thinking about ourselves as free people, right? All men are created equal, government by consent of the governed, everybody possesses rights by nature. A certain way of thinking about freedom and how it's sustained, and also the sorts of structures and ways of acting as citizens that are crucial to maintaining freedom generation to generation. The rule of law is very important in that. Government by consent, being good winners and good losers once the election is over. These are all things I think our history shows us ways we did it well and ways, unfortunately, tragically, we failed that test, and it had some very costly, it was a great cost when we don't do that correctly. So I think history can inform especially those matters that we are most embroiled with today.
And so many people travel to Lexington, Virginia for its history, for
Yeah.
Civil War history. Do you think that people are able to learn about that and reflect on that when they come here?
I think they can. The problem, of course, is you have representations of history, for example, in signs or monuments, buildings, etc., that don't tell the whole story. It's just if you see Stonewall Jackson or Robert E. Lee or Washington, for that matter, you already probably bring meaning to that. It already has either a good or a not so good meaning to you. It already has a connotation. And it's informed not just by thoughtfulness and real research, it's sometimes informed by innocent prejudice. And but by innocent, I mean it's just the air you breathe growing up. I was taught this. I thought Lincoln actually owned slaves, things that are, clear falsehoods. And so to come here and add to that, I think will require more effort. So you have at Virginia Military Institute a museum about their institution as well as key players in their institution, like George Marshall. Washington and Lee has Lee Chapel with a museum underneath it that tells the story of one of our namesakes, Robert E. Lee. We are going to be building, we're in the process of raising money to build an institutional history museum that's going to be state-of-the-art. We have a director, Lynn Rainbill, who's going to run the thing. And we want to tell the story not only of the development of our university, but the development of the United States over that period of time. Our university existed before the United States existed, founded in 1749. And so what we hope will happen is people will come here and not just go, wow, you guys are named after 2 slaveholders, but understand what it was that they did to contribute to the institution that I teach at now, Washington and Lee University. So by going to that museum, it's going to be more than names. We're going to see the history about those names, unvarnished. It's not going to be, we're not going to Photoshop it, or we're not going to airbrush that history. It's going to be a museum. It's going to be an educational, that's why we exist. We exist to teach, and we hope that this museum will do a better job than simply coming to a city that actually has streets called Confederate Circle. Like, what's that about? I wouldn't live on a street called Confederate Circle, but so we're hoping that with each year we do a better job as a university of telling at least our story, and we hope that in doing that we will actually be doing a better job of telling America's story.
And their contributions to the university, to Lexington, what is that? What type of contributions did
Well, separately, both made contributions at a pivotal time in our university. Certainly more recently, we've had donors who have given way more money than Lee or Washington ever did. But we're already a thriving university. We're already a university that it's got a good endowment, and it's going to help us bolster the things that we're already doing well. Washington donated canal shares through its profits, were a part of the original or the early endowment of the university, and they were so appreciative of that donation that they asked him for permission to use his name and call the school Washington College. Robert E. Lee, after the war was over, a war that he fought to establish Southern independence, a war that he fought, if you will, to destroy the United States, he accepted his defeat. And as a way to show, by example, how Southerners who rebelled should act now that the war was over, he decided to assume a civilian occupation to become president of really a podunk boys' college at the time, had maybe 50 students, was in financial ruins. It was ravaged during the war, as was VMI. Cheek and jowl, we exist with VMI. And by becoming president for the next 5 years, the last 5 years of his life, he devoted himself to submitting to federal authority, and in his own way, a peculiar way, as a Southern rebel, he didn't think he was a rebel, obviously, but in his own peculiar way, he thought that leading a college, training the youth, if you will, the leaders of tomorrow, that he would be contributing to reconciliation. And he drew students north and south of the Mason-Dixon line. Within a year or two, I think, or by the end of his tenure, we drew 400 students, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I've been told that that was more than University of Virginia had at the time, which was going through its own problems. And so we're at a moment in our time where Lee was looked to as the man for the Confederacy. His example for me was huge. I think he was a traitor. I don't have a portrait of him on my wall in my house. That won't happen. But I do I appreciate the contribution he made to our university, because he did it in a very public way and in a way that he self-consciously thought he was setting an example for others. There were soldiers who wanted to turn it into a guerrilla war. He said no to that. There were people who wanted to put up monuments. He said no to that. He said, we have to accept that we lost, and this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to do it by shaping the souls of tomorrow's leaders. And he drew from north and south of the Mason-Dixon line. Northerners were impressed by that effort. Harriet Beecher Stowe's father, I'm getting his name right now, but I think it's Henry Ward Beecher. He saw the value of what Lee was doing. So there were even Northerners from New England and the Northeast who recognized that yes, what Lee had done before was horrible, but that he was spending the last 5 years, what turned out to be the last 5 years of his life, as a uniter, as a reconciler. And again, I'm not saying he was a paragon of racial justice and virtue. He was not. But at least while during the war, he freed the slaves that the one family that he owned and those in an estate from his mother-in-law that he was the executor of. And so in his way, I think, he did both personally and publicly set an example for us and pretty much saved Washington College and did a number of innovations educationally and pedagogically, annexing a law school, creating a program of journalism. Foreign languages at the time were not taught. You know, back then the only languages you were supposed to learn were Greek and Latin, the so-called dead languages. But he was very forward-thinking in what he thought a college could do. And in those ways, I think he wasn't just a president. He was transformative as a president. That doesn't redeem him. That doesn't exonerate, fighting for white supremacy and the entrenchment of slavery and trying to destroy the United States. That doesn't exonerate him from that. I don't think he redeemed himself in that respect. But what I do think is, I hope people value what he did for this institution that I work at, and for that reason, I think it's worth maintaining his name and giving him that honor, if you will.
I think that's such, an educated, but an interesting perspective and interesting value. And with that, kind of adding on to when we're talking about renaming things.
Sure.
And especially in Lexington. Just Lexington. That's the only thing that we're talking here about. Is that something that we should consider with all things named after him and all things named after Jackson? Keeping the value in his name here.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're here taping this across the street from what used to be called R.E. Lee Episcopal Church. It wasn't always R.E. Lee Episcopal Church. They did a great job with some plaques out front to tell the story of the history of the name, what is now known, what it was known before as Grace Episcopal Church. They did some serious soul searching a few years ago. They first voted not to change the name. Then a couple of years later, they changed the name, but I think they did it in a way that was deliberate, informed, and the product of as much consensus as you can manage over such a divisive issue. I've had one principle all along that guides me in my understanding of whether you should rename anything or take down monuments or remove them, destroy them, put them in a museum. For me, the reason you put a monument up should be the same reason you take it down. And so if at a point in our past, clearly this city valued the Confederacy and its principal leaders like Lee, like Jackson. They value the Confederacy. As I mentioned, there's a street named Confederate Circle in this town. Especially on public property and government locations and buildings, if that's supposed to represent all of the community and presumably what our community values as a community, that has to be something inclusive. And so if our community consensus today is, you know what, we don't value treason or what we consider treason. We don't value people who tried to destroy what Washington tried to create, a free republic. Today we value other things. I think they have every right, we have every right to do so in a deliberative process, have a hearing, have meetings, let's have a discussion, let's fight it out in the papers, let's talk to our neighbors. And at the end of the day, if we think, you know what, we value other things now, there's no reason why we can't represent that value by naming things according to those values. We did it in the past, why not do it now? So if the reason you put a monument up no longer is a reason held by that community, they should take it down. Some people will say, well, aren't you erasing history? It does become a little more difficult when the sorts of things that are named by people we no longer value, like we have a cemetery in town that was called Stonewall Jackson Cemetery. We have a hospital, Stonewall Jackson Hospital. Carilion now is going to change that to represent what we believe today. I don't know if Stonewall Jackson had any connection to that hospital, so for me, it's no skin off my nose if they change that name. Battlefields that have monuments, they're telling a story. And in that sense, they are giving a history, and people who are tourists want to know that history, learn about that history. You go to Gettysburg, and you see some famous monuments there. You also see a massive statue of Robert E. Lee there. Well, Robert E. Lee did fight in the Battle of Gettysburg and that engagement, and so it makes sense that you have a statue of Lee there. It's not an invitation for people to worship him as a patron saint of the lost cause. It's telling a story. A street name, I keep coming back to Confederate Circle, or names after people that we no longer honor or value. If we do some soul searching there and a decent historical dive on that, if we research it and go, in a number of cases, these names were put up precisely to intimidate the black population. I'm going to say that doesn't jibe with what we believe today. I think it's entirely reasonable for us, through an orderly process, not toppling statues down at night, graffiti and defacing public property, things that you don't own. I think as a result of a productive, informed discussion and the rule of law again, if at the end of the day we think, we value other things and we're going to name things after, we're going to honor those values, I think that's entirely reasonable.
Not a one-size-fits-all approach.
I don't think so. And that's why I would say that that's different from a private institution like Washington and Lee. There's a reason why those two namesakes, both of whom were slaveholders, there's a reason why they are the namesakes of my university, and it's not because they were slaveholders. Our university is not named, we didn't add Lee. The faculty actually recommended that to the trustees, and the trustees agreed in 1870-71. They didn't put his name on it because we wanted to promote slavery. We didn't put Washington's name on it because we celebrated slaveholding. No, we celebrate what he did to help put our institution on a sound financial basis, and in Lee's case, to get us forward thinking. Our motto is not unmindful of the future. Lee was not unmindful of the future in thinking about, what kind of institution can we be? He used to be superintendent of West Point. He didn't have that kind of latitude at West Point, right? If he wanted to order pencils, he had to send that up the chain of command. At W&L, he had pretty much free reign to do what he wanted to, and the trustees loved the money he was raising for the institution, loved the prestige he loaned to it. Yes, prestige that he earned by trying to divide this country, but now he was trying to unite, reconcile, submit, and in all those ways, I think, that is something that we honor, we value. I am thankful for those choices. I am thankful for the ways in which he rejected what he was trying to do during the war. I am thankful that he decided to spend the remaining years of his life in this way more productive way. And for that reason, even though he's not a hero of mine, I think he should be someone we value for that contribution to our university.
Where does that leave Lexington? With all of this being said, and with the renaming and choosing what values we hold,
right,
and the identity, where does that leave us now?
Lexington is in something of a quandary, because we are not just a town that happens to name certain things after Confederates. We're a historic town. Stonewall Jackson actually was a professor at VMI. There's a reason why there's a statue of him there. So he made his own unique contribution. There's a Stonewall Jackson house in town. And so a number of the places and structures and edifices that are named after certainly Stonewall Jackson have historical significance. And so that story, I think, is told in buildings, in the names of certain things. Your garden variety street, I think if that's a public thing, I don't think it's necessary that streets continue to be named after a very small and highly divisive, polarizing time in our country's history. And so I would say the short version is case-by-case basis. Let's see if they really are telling a significant historical story, a story that people do come to Lexington to learn, and they're not all fans of the Confederacy, but they're interested, they're fans of America and fans of how we got to where we got. We are a product, this country is a product of disagreement, debate, and sometimes war, okay? And so folks who are interested in our past, I think, can learn by visiting historic cities. And so certain places, I think, should retain those names because they are telling a history. And in that sense, it would be, to an extent, erasing history by removing those in those instances. But a hospital named after Stonewall Jackson, I'm open to exploring whether he had anything to do with that hospital. And if not, I mean, it's not my choice. Carilion, they bought it, and they're changing the name. All right, that's good on them. But I'm more interested in those places and institutions that are public. And if they're public and they represent us, then we should determine for our generation, and perhaps for future generations, but it'll be up to them, what we want the names of those things to be, and therefore what we believe we represent now.